Good afternoon and good morning to all of you that have joined us for this webinar. My name is Sudha David-Wilp, and on behalf of the German Marshall Fund's Berlin office, I'd like to welcome you to this last webinar of the year for our office. And we're going to close it out with an all-star GMF cast to talk about the outcome of the German election and specifically what to expect from the traffic light coalition that was just sworn in last week. After 16 years of having Chancellor Merkel at the head of Germany, I think there are a lot of, there's a lot of curiosity and also interest in what changes and what sort of continuity this traffic light coalition will continue with. As I mentioned, I've got all my colleagues here with us today. We're gonna have a short conversation for about 20 minutes. And then I'm going to ask all of you to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to pose any questions. We're going to start with Markus Ziener, who's our Helmut Schmidt Fellow based in the DC office, to give us a quick outlook of the coalition agreement with the three parties, which is basically a novel situation for the federal level in Germany. The coalition led by Olaf Scholz of the SPD, the center-left SPD, the Liberals, and the Greens. And then I'm going to move on to Ambassador John Emerson. He is the former ambassador of the United States to Germany and a member of the Board of Trustees for the German Marshall Fund, and also chair of the American Council on Germany, and also vice chairman of Capital International. Then I'm going to move on to my colleague, Corinna Horst, who's based in Brussels. She's the Guido Goldman Director of Leadership Programs and Senior Fellow at GMF Brussels. And finally, Michal Baranowski, our Director of GMF's Warsaw office. So I'd like to get their point of view from where they sit on this new government. So as I mentioned, let's start with Markus. There was like 180 pages, around 180 pages in this coalition agreement. Just give us a sense, Markus, of sort of the major points when it comes to foreign policy in this document.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sudha. It's actually 188 pages, and it's foreign policy is not really the main thrust of this coalition agreement. They're very much focusing on domestic issues, and they stay rather vague when it comes to certain critical issues like China and Russia. I'll come to that in a second. I think if we look at the coalition treaty and what we saw now in the first couple of days after the swearing in, we see that we have basically a values-based approach, very much putting forward by the Greens, versus a more pragmatic approach by the Chancellery, by Olaf Scholz. So, I mean, that's a little bit of a kind of the short way of saying it, because at the same time, you definitely have other ministries like the Ministry for Climate or the Ministry of Justice also doing foreign policy. So we have to see how this plays out. Now, the main thing is actually what we have to watch at this point is definitely how is Annalena Baerbock and how is Olaf Scholz are going to reconcile their differences, and that's what I want to focus on here, because I think that that's most important. Now, why do we talk about the Chancellery at this point? Because if Angela Merkel is somewhat of a guideline of how Olaf Scholz wants to handle the foreign policy, then Angela Merkel, well, she kept foreign policy issues like Russia, China, United States, Transatlantic Relationship very close to herself. So it's really a kind of, we see a little bit of a tussle already going on between those two institutions within the government. Who is really calling the shots when it comes to foreign policy? We don't know that yet, I have to say. Now, what are the key issues? Of course, I just already mentioned it's Russia, China, Poland, Hungary, and the transatlantic relationship. Now let's talk a little about Russia here at this point. I think Michal will chip in here later on as well. Why is this so a current issue? Because certainly because of the troop buildup we are seeing at the Ukrainian border, and because of the Nord Stream 2 issue. The Greens always have opposed Nord Stream 2, the gas pipeline, because they think it was just an ill-advised project. I think we all know the reasons why. The SPD was very much in favor because they see it as a vital way of getting energy to Germany, a country that is phasing out of coal and nuclear at the same time. So there's a gap to bridge. Currently, we're standing at about 45% of our energy mix coming from renewables, and we have to make up until we get to the point where we have a higher degree of renewables in our energy mix. So this is one thing. Nord Stream 2, where is a conflicting line between those two players. The FDP, the Liberals, are more supportive of the green point of view. So and the Greens are now actually saying, well, we probably can use the gas pipeline as a bargaining chip to kind of punish the Russians if they do something we don't want to see, in particular when it comes to Ukraine. So this is the one thing. When it comes to China, we're a little bit in the same kind of situation. So on the one hand, you have a values-based foreign policy, meaning emphasizing human rights, kind of strengthening democratic forces on the one hand, which is very much what the Greens want to do and which they actually said beforehand, so they can't really retreat on that. And Olaf Scholz seeing how many jobs are depending on our trade with China. I mean, for instance, if you look at Volkswagen, our biggest producer of cars, they're selling almost every other car to China or in China. So cutting off ties with China would have a huge impact on our domestic job situation. So I think Scholz is probably very cautious here. Third point, transatlantic relationship. There's a lot of concern about what's going to happen in the United States in 2024. And I see that being here in Washington, talking to many people. They understand that that in Europe and in Germany in particular, I think they're very much worried about what's going to happen if Donald Trump or some kind of like Donald Trump follower is taking over the White House in 3 years. So there's a lot of reluctance to be seen to put the weight behind Joe Biden, which is very much to the dismay, I think, of the current administration. But at the same time, I think that's understood after the kind of nightmare of the past 4 years under Donald Trump. And I think the initial month with Joe Biden were also not really that, well, there was a lot of trouble actually, which have to be reconciled. Final question, what can be expected from Germany in this case? I mean, that was also one of the questions that we put forward when we started this conversation here. On defense, we have to see. I mean, in the coalition treaty, they're talking vaguely of a 3% goal, which would be much more than the 2%. But I mean, the 3% is not really clear how they kind of account that, and probably they factor in everything that's also related to development aid and other things. So it's a little kind of unclear how they want to do that. And given the nature of this coalition, I mean, it's for the Green Party, this is a peace party. You have to remember that. That's where they're coming from. Putting so much money into defense, not good. Same thing for the SPD, also not really eager to spend money on that. They have other focuses. On the other hand, don't forget, it was the Red-Green coalition that was approving military action on the Balkans at the end of the 90s, and also giving the green light of supporting the United States in Afghanistan. So we shouldn't forget that. So sometimes things happen, although they're not really visible and expected. And given what's going on in Russia and the buildup with Ukraine, I believe that probably some sort of reality check sets in, that we probably have to do more. Final word, if the United States is busy with themselves very much, also with China, then it's even further and even more important for Europe to step up. I stop here.
Thank you, Markus. Maybe just one question before we go to John Emerson. It seems like you're not very bullish on the transatlantic relationship, although the transatlantic relationship was really emphasized in the document, in the coalition agreement. So at the end of the day, does it seem like this coalition is right now based on rhetoric, and you're waiting to see actual, if there will be actual action? Because I believe Scholz even came out today and said that, you know, we want constructive dialogue with Russia, but at the same time, there will if there's a further incursions into Ukraine?
It's ambivalent. I mean, the transatlantic relationship had a rough start with Joe Biden, travel ban, the Afghanistan pullout, AUKUS, the submarine deal with Australia, the punitive tariffs on steel and aluminum. I mean, they're all different in the nature if you look into each and every kind of case, but still, I mean, that wasn't really the kind of the push we expected. Now, I think, I mean, when it comes to what can we do to support Joe Biden and his administration, is it how big is the impact the Europeans really have in their policy? I believe not so much. It's very domestically driven here, and from what I see is that transatlantic relations are, at this administration here in the United States, not something that's very high on the agenda. And I think that I was at a conference here at the French embassy not long ago. There was so much complaint about a lack of responsiveness that's why I'm not bullish, to be honest.
Okay, I would wager that Ambassador John Emerson will have a different point of view than you, Markus, but I'll let him explain his perspectives, because I would think, John, that with the election of Olaf Scholz, who has also emphasized the importance of democracy from within, sort of making our democracies more resilient, that President Joe Biden has a natural partner in Germany on this front, but also just in general for all the important items on the transatlantic agenda, albeit there are some bumps on the road. Markus mentioned Nord Stream 2. What do you think moving forward, where Washington is going to want to see more cooperation with Berlin?
Well, I guess my question is, what do you think the world was like during the Obama years? And what do you think the world was like during the Bush years? In point of fact, we were opposed to Nord Stream 2. We were pushing, it was during the Obama years that the whole issue of NATO funding even came up. And there were differences in how to deal with Ukraine. There were differences with how to deal with Afghanistan. There were differences over the Iraq War, which rose to a height, I think, during the Schroeder years. And, and of course, 6 weeks after I arrived as ambassador, we had Handygate. But by the time I left, I think in 2017, there was a sense that this transatlantic relationship was as strong as it could possibly be. So I would say everybody needs to step back and take a deep breath. In point of fact, you're absolutely right, Sudha, with Olaf Scholz, with this, three-party coalition and their deep commitment to democracy, to values-based rule of law, to values-based foreign policy. There's great coincidence and coordination with the United States in terms of our interests and in terms of our approach to foreign policy. We can start ticking them off. First of all, look at the approach to climate and climate change. That was non-existent. In fact, it was adversarial during the Trump years. That's something that is clearly a major all-of-government existential priority for the U.S. administration, and I would warrant for Germany as well. On Nord Stream, instead of continuing the constant haranguing and berating that we saw during the Trump years, the Biden administration has moved to a much more realistic posture, which is, okay, that horse is largely out of the barn. Now let's look at how we're going to deal with Nord Stream, particularly in the face of Russian aggression. And I haven't been read into the conversations between President Biden and Olaf Scholz on, what the consequences would be should Russia again move into the Donbass region. But I can guarantee you that the opening or not opening of Nord Stream 2 is something that's very much on the table in those conversations. So of course, everything isn't hunky-dory in the sense that, no, the United States of America is not going to do everything that every progressive in Germany wants it to do, or every foreign policy expert in Germany wants it to do on any issue. Chancellor Merkel understood that. My last conversation with her, which was right on the cusp of the COVID close down, the question that she asked, there were about 10 of us at a dinner that Christoph Heusgen put together in New York. And Karen Donfried was also there, by the way. The question she asked is, okay, how much of this in terms of the Trump approach to foreign policy is going to change with a new president? And how much of it is a reflection of systemic changes that have occurred within the United States as it relates to things like trade, approach to China, the idea of the United States wanting to pull back from seemingly never-ending international engagements. And we had a very candid conversation about that. So, I don't think there was much dispute between German leadership and American leadership over the fact that we were going to pull out of Afghanistan. I don't think any of the nations that were part of that ISAF mission believed that this was a never-ending mission of nation building. The mission was, to go in and crush Al-Qaeda, Afghanistan, to punish the Taliban for harboring them, and to capture and kill Osama bin Laden. That mission had largely been accomplished. Now, obviously, the way in which it was conducted, I don't think you'll find anyone on this side of the Atlantic who'd say, hey, that worked out great. So clearly it was messy. It was maybe messier than it needed to be. And by the way, the Biden administration is at this point probably paying a bit of a political price for that domestically. On the sub-snub, hey, I've heard some schadenfreude from Germany. Germany actually lost that contract to France in the first place. That was, I think you have to kind of go, I don't think the issue was the sub. I think the issue was a concern by Europeans that they weren't being engaged and involved and included in this pivot to Asia, in how we're going to deal with and confront China, in a concern that somehow the transatlantic relationship would be replaced by the Quad, which is the US, Japan, India, and Australia. And I think that in the wake of the kerfluffle over the sub situation, there have been multiple meetings and conversations by and between Tony Blinken, Secretary of State, and his counterparts, and President Biden and his counterparts about engaging and including our European allies, because the one major difference between the Biden approach to the world and the Trump approach to the world is that Joe Biden believes that our strength is in our alliances and in our values-based approach to the world. Russia and China don't have allies. They have transactional relationships with countries based on things like protection or things like or economic matters. They don't have values-based allies. That is our great strength. And notwithstanding that strength, it doesn't mean we're going to necessarily agree on everything. I will tell you that on my first, literally second month or third month at Post, President Gauck gave the October 3rd speech in 2013 saying that, which I believe your colleague Thomas Kleine-Brockhoff had a hand in constructing, saying that Germany is not an island and needs to take more of a leadership role, particularly when it comes to Europe taking more of a leadership role and not just waiting for the United States to lead on every international issue. We were thrilled at Mission Germany in the embassy to hear that speech, and we were equally thrilled when President Steinmeier, who was then Foreign Minister Steinmeier, and then Secretary of Defense Ursula von der Leyen echoed the same message and even put more specifics behind it at the Munich Security Conference in February of 2014. So the idea that the United States may be expecting, notwithstanding this commitment to our alliances, notwithstanding this commitment to re-engage with and help to build and strengthen the international multilateral organizations that the Trump administration was walking away from, notwithstanding all of that, we think it's good for Europe and good for the United States for Europe to take more of a leadership role and for Germany to be a part of that. Now, as to, so I actually am pretty bullish about the way things are going. And let me just tell you, for anybody in Germany who says well, Biden's probably going to lose, so we better not invest in this relationship because it's going to be Trump all over again. That is very foolhardy and shows a complete ignorance of American politics. Yes, Trump will get the nomination if he decides to run again. And yes, Biden's numbers are low. They are actually not lower than Ronald Reagan's were at this point in his presidency. In fact, a year from now, in 1982, after the midterm elections where Reagan and the Republicans got shellacked, Walter Mondale was beating him by 9 points. Ronald Reagan won the election in 1984. It was an election I was involved with because I was running Gary Hart's campaign at the time for the nomination, the Democratic nomination. But Reagan won that election by winning 49 out of 50 states. So now I don't predict a Biden win of 49 out of 50 states, but I'm just saying to make a decision about about how we're going to react to the United States of America based on the fear that Donald Trump will be back is not very smart. And I mean, a month is a lifetime in American politics. 3 years from now is multiple lifetimes in American politics. And I'll tell you something else. Even if the Democrats do poorly in 2022, which is what happened to Barack Obama in 2010, and what happened to George, Bush, it was more 2006. It's what happened to Reagan in 82, and it's what happened to Bill Clinton in 94. Guess what? All three of those people got reelected. So because the American people kind of like a balance in terms of one reason that if one party controls the White House, the House, and the Senate, they tend to do poorly in the next midterm election. So the American people kind of like a little bit more of a balance. And that would be something that would actually be in a President Biden running for re-election's favor in 2024. But apart from all of that, we have an opportunity here to invest in and strengthen the transatlantic relationship, to strengthen the multilateral institutions that do need some reform, whether it's the WTO or the WHO or various organizations within the UN, to strengthen them during the remaining 3 years of the first term of Joe Biden. Let's invest in that. Let's take the opportunity to build that, and let's not walk away because we're afraid the boogeyman Donald Trump's going to show up in another 3 years.
Thank you, John. Yeah, it's certainly early days still. And you did give me a really good segue for Corinna, because you mentioned the Gauck speech about Germany and taking a role, a leadership role, and taking more responsibility on. So Corinna, I know it's still busy in Brussels because there's a council meeting. You haven't adjourned for the holidays just yet. With Olaf Scholz now as Chancellor, do you think Brussels, what's the mood in Brussels? Do they expect this new traffic light government to actually assume a leadership role on behalf of the EU? What are the expectations?
Thanks, Sudha. Yes, so we do currently have a council summit, kind of a summit going on, a European summit going on. So Scholz and all the other heads of states are in Brussels, actually next door. And it's quite interesting because actually Chancellor Scholz is not the only newcomer to the summit, but we also have a new Swedish head of state and we have a new Austrian head of state, but nobody's really interested in the two of them. But everybody sort of asks about, so how is the new German government going to position? So, I mean, in a nutshell, Brussels is very, very curious and they're very closely watching this. And as usual, it's about people, it's about parties, and then it's sort of a bit about the context. And, you know, when we talk about Brussels and sort of more the European dimension, you know, we talk about a couple of institutions. I mean, there's the Council, there's the European Commission, there's the European External Action Service, sort of the European Foreign Ministry, so to speak, and then there's the European Parliament. And so I've been trying to get the pulse over the last few days, and there's some sort of interesting observation, but everybody has sort of this question. So where is, you know, what do we do with this new government? One thing that I want to mention, I mean, you know, both Chancellor Scholz as well as Annalena Baerbock did the right thing in the sense within very short hours of their confirmation, they went to Paris and they went to Brussels. So a very important signal that both of them sent in the sense of recognizing France leadership role in Europe as well, next to Germany, as well as really making a strong statement about the new German government being committed to Europe and the European agenda. And I think with the coalition, there's really a unique opportunity because Social Democrats and the Greens and then the Liberals, they touch on different policy subject matters, from very much the sort of social, the human sort of aspect, and then the Greens obviously with the green agenda that cuts across all portfolios, and then the finance and growth, and that's important to the different stakeholders in Brussels. So when we sort of look at the European Commission, they're very curious, and they very much are looking for the new German government to be really a partner in their Green Deal proposal, and what it's sort of called the Fit for 55. So basically cutting emissions in a much shorter time period. Obviously, COVID, they very much hope to have Germany as an ally there, as well as the EU is planning to be sort of a facilitator rather than having the segmentation as well. COVID was the main topic this morning at the summit, and they have already produced some sort of resolutions and outcomes. It's a bit vague, but they were trying to rein in the Italians again, who had gone sort of a bit rogue by deciding their own border restrictions and requiring a test by everybody, which the rest of Europe didn't like. Obviously, the budget and the debt conversations is important as well. Lindner, the new finance minister, has been to Paris and has actually been much more conciliatory than he was sort of during the negotiation. And so, the expectation here are about stability, but as well investment and growth. And and then there is really also the climate friendly. And again, this is sort of something that cuts across all the various angles. And this is sort of interesting. Cem Özdemir, the new agricultural minister, he was also in Brussels already because there was an agricultural minister meeting. Again, he was very sort of pro-European. He has Europe experience, having been a member of the European Parliament, so he knows how it works. He might have somewhat of an easy role for the beginning because the agricultural budget has just been passed, yet he is well positioned now in his role to also make sure that within Europe, when it comes to the agricultural reforms, to bridge that gap between sort of the big agricultural sort of stakeholders who kind of want to proceed and receive their funding, but also the communities who kind of want to change and make it all about sustainability and animal rights. So not quite easy, but he has sort of a slow start. The last thing I want to say, and that sort of takes us also back to France, is if you think about the German Greens being very, very progressive when it comes to the aspiration of anything climate related and sustainability, the German Greens sit in the European parliaments together with the French Greens and all the other countries. And there it might become very interesting sort of how this relationship pans out, because the German Greens are very much against nuclear power, while the French take a much more lenient sort of way on it, and so do the French Greens. So I think there is a lot of requirements for finding compromise, but that's what Europe really is for. I think the one thing that's sort of still out is sort of how the new government will really go about the rule of law question, and this might be a segue to Michal. Angela Merkel has been somewhat, holding back by being really tough on Hungary and Poland, increasingly also Slovenia. So here, I think there are some expectations among certain people in Brussels that the new German government takes a stronger role on it, but the verdict is still out. Thanks.
Thanks, Corinna, and thanks for teeing up Michal for us. I mean, I wish we had more time because I'd love to get your thoughts on also Annalena Baerbock as a female leader and what the expectations are, but we'll save that for another webinar because I see that there are a lot of questions coming in, and I'd like to encourage all of you to put them in the Q&A box. Some of them will answer directly, but I will get to them in just a moment. But I want to go to Michal, my colleague in Warsaw, because as Corinna mentioned, this newly sworn in government made visits to Brussels and Paris, but Warsaw was also a trip that was important to make this trip early on, but that's not necessarily because the relationship between Germany and Poland is hunky-dory, right, Michael? I mean, tell us a little bit about, what are the positive aspects, but what are the thorny issues right now in the bilateral relationship?
Thank you, Sudha. It's great to be with you. And yeah, it's not a hunky-dory relationship to say the least. I think part of the reason, and it was very much appreciated that both the foreign minister and the chancellor came to Warsaw as a third stop. So Brussels, Paris, Warsaw. And I think, let me start with further east. I think part of this was a message of support for not only Poland but Eastern flank in this incoming test. And Markus was talking about it, but I think it's important to emphasize that there is a huge test coming the way of this new German government, and it was the green-red coalition that had to decide what to do about the war in the Balkans. And we are now having Russia trying to absolutely upend the European security system. It's not only about Ukraine. They are putting on the table demands, not only about Ukraine's NATO membership, but about also what NATO can or cannot do on its own territory, what kind of weapons NATO can have on its own territory. So we are, so this is going to be something, no matter what happens, Putin is already using the threat of force to West, for the West to change its policy, and that's going to be addressed both to Washington, but very much, I think Putin is taking advantage of the change of, in certain moment of instability and change of power in Berlin, and also upcoming election in France. So I think that's one aspect that I would say that's on the most positive side of this trip. When you ask about the bilateral relationship, you would think that given the geopolitical situation, it would be a perfect opportunity for a new opening between Poland and Germany, notwithstanding the big differences between governments on rule of law. But the trip has shown that it's not the case, that we will not see any new opening. There was very much from the Polish side, especially focused on the past, and viewers need to know that Germany is, of course, a polarizing issue in Polish domestic politics. So you have one side of the political spectrum that is very excited about the new government in Berlin, and the other side of the political spectrum that is not excited at all. And so the talk was much more about past issues, past important but grievances. The real issue that there is a big disagreement, no matter who is in power in Warsaw, will be about Nord Stream 2, and it also ties into discussion about Russia. And I think this is, as Markus and Ambassador Emerson pointed out, this is going to be the big decision for the new government. But there was also talk about war reparations. There was a talk about all the issues of the past, and one very important disagreement looking to the future that perhaps didn't get as much attention, and perhaps this is in a bit of a exaggerated worry in Warsaw in the government circles, which is the point of the coalition agreement that talk about federalization of Europe. This was something that was raised both by the foreign minister, the prime minister, and also the chairman of the Law and Justice Party as the big threat of Europe federalizing in a sort of centrally directed state with too much of a influence of Germany. So that's the I would say the taste of the relationship right now. Don't expect any huge positive changes unless there is, well, I would say don't expect anything great positive moves coming out of Warsaw Berlin agenda right now. Thanks.
Thanks, Michal. So there's about 10 minutes left, and there's a lot of questions that have been answered in the chat, but I just wanted to bring them up. And specifically, I think the two large themes that we've been seeing in the Q&A box are China and Russia. And Michal, since I still have you, why don't you quickly weigh in, and then I want to go to John and Corinna, and then have Markus sort of close us out. I mean, do you think that the polls are confident that Germany will do the right thing if there is in fact an incursion early in the year as intelligence agencies are reporting? Or do you think that they're going to have to look to Washington to put pressure on Germany?
This is an excellent question, and it's a mixed bag right now. So let me point out a couple very encouraging signs. And one actually came today with the foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, being very clearly tough and clear on Russia, given the recognition by the German court that it was a Russian-sponsored agent who committed an assassination in the center of Berlin, and Germany, under her leadership, expelled two Russian diplomats. That's the principled, clear-eye foreign policy that we would love to see from Berlin as well. And also the chatter in the background about Nord Stream 2 being the big stick potentially for Russia, and it's clear that it's not going to be approved anytime soon, is in the positive category. On the negative side, and there was a question from Susan, I forget, but Susan asked to what extent Germany and US are on the same page when it comes to the upcoming or the brewing conflict. And here when I'm a little bit less positive, because what we are hearing from NATO, what we are also hearing from Ukrainian colleagues, and many of you might have seen very explicitly the Ukrainian defense minister talking about Germany opposing military sales to Ukraine. And that's something that we are seeing right now at NATO. It seems like the tune has not changed with the new government. So there is a bit of a disconnect to what the Chancellor is saying, what the Foreign Minister is saying, and what Germany is doing in the NAC right now. And hopefully this is just this moment where the alliance is still trying to find its bearing, and Karen Dorfrid is briefing the allies as we speak in Brussels on her conversations in Moscow and Kiev. And so hopefully we'll get on the same page, because we will absolutely have to. And Germany will be expected to take, by US and its allies, to take much more real active role than Germany is in the past. Let me stop.
John, I'd like to go to you about the two foreign policy issues that Markus brought up at the beginning of this discussion, specifically China and Russia. I mean, I think in the United States, the strategic focus is China, but because of the brewing conflict, as Michal said, it seems like our attention is also on the Ukraine, as Karen Donfried is currently in a week of shuttle diplomacy all across Europe. So what do you think? Do you think Germany can be sort of the linchpin for the United States when it comes to confronting China, but also curbing Russia at the moment?
Well, first of all, on the Ukraine situation and this question of militarizing or offensive weapons for Ukraine, don't forget that during the Obama-Merkel era, Obama was under great pressure from Congress, particularly led by Senator John McCain, to provide offensive lethal aid to Ukraine. And Angela Merkel pleaded strenuously with Obama not to do that. And he refrained from doing that in order to give her the diplomatic space as she was trying to negotiate the Minsk Accords, what have you. So the Trump administration obviously took a different approach on this. But just I wanted to remind everybody of that, in terms of the past approach. Look, I mean, Germany and the United States are always going to have somewhat different views as it relates to Russia, as it relates to China. I mean, Germany, I always used to say, is somewhat schizophrenic when it comes to Russia. Maybe a little bit of hangover from World War II. Maybe the fact that, almost a third of the German public, grew up learning to speak Russian and sort of having exposure to Russian culture, whereas the 2/3 grew up learning to speak English and having exposure to rule of law and all that. So there's and of course economically there's the oil and gas relationship, not much more than that, but certainly the oil and gas relationship, which probably took on a greater importance during the Energiewende when, Germany stepped away from nuclear, except insofar as it buys it from France. So I think there's always going to be, you're never going to see the two in complete alignment on that. But my sense is, as it relates to Nord Stream 2 and the use of Nord Stream 2 as a club, should Russia take further offensive action vis-a-vis Ukraine, my sense in reading between the lines is that that's pretty well agreed to. I don't see how Germany, particularly if they don't want to see us get into NATO, get into some kind of a kinetic, response to Russia moving into Ukraine, which there is very little, if any, interest in NATO in doing that. It's one reason I think Ukraine will never be a member of NATO, because of that fear. And by the way, that's different from Poland, which is a member of NATO, Article 5 and all that. But I think that I would find it very surprising if Russia were to move into Ukraine and Germany didn't go along with the United States in terms of the response vis-a-vis using Nord Stream 2 and some of the economic measures that we've talked about. Remember, Angela Merkel was instrumental in pulling together and holding together the EU in terms of sanctions against Russia on multiple occasions. Those sanctions were reviewed every 6 months. Vis-a-vis China, look, China's Germany's biggest trading partner. The auto industry has, deep ties into China. I've been arguing for quite some time, certainly over the last 4 years, speaking at conferences and the like, that, at some point, that's not going to be good for the German auto industry. You're going to quickly see, you got to use Chinese manufactured parts, not Mittelstand manufactured parts in your cars. And you're going to see competition as China begins to, absorb and copy the IP that the wonderful German car makers have, et cetera. But that being said, there's a huge connection there. And I think we in the United States are actually glad to see, particularly with the Greens as part of this government, that there might be a little bit more of a sense of the importance of standing up to China. And so, I mean, that remains to be seen how that all plays out. But my sense is that maybe we're going to be a little bit closer as it relates to China than we have been, at least during the last 4 years.
Thanks, John. And Corinna, I just wanted to sort of respond to one question in the Q&A box, specifically France. I mean, I talked to you about Germany's leadership role within the EU, but actually it's France that's taking on the EU presidency come January. What does Brussels expect with regard to France and then also the Franco-German motor within the European Union? And then Markus will conclude with you and then conclude. Thank you. Corinna, please.
So from what I gather these days here in Brussels is, I mean, Paris is very present. I mean, for one, because they're preparing for their own EU presidency. And secondly, also because they are continuing on this path of the, the sort of strategic autonomy sort of concept, and they have been using a bit that lull, let's say, while the new German government was sort of in negotiations, to sort of be present here. And they're very articulate when it comes to, this sort of security defense realm and sort of all the aspects related to this. So because of the that ambivalent the ambivalent voices we hear, both Chancellor as well as the Foreign Ministry, the verdict is still out. Also, if I look at Germany's new defense minister, who is a woman, a very close friend to Scholz, very competent, but not necessarily with the military and security background. We also don't know what her role is. So I think France will definitely try and take that opportunity. And how this relationship plays out, I think, has really to do how the new German government, the coalition, and sort of, in some ways, many of the ministers and Olaf Scholz in himself, what kind of relationship they build up with their French counterparts. I think I wouldn't underestimate that this plays a big role in Europe. But I wouldn't rule out that, there will be sort of a bit of a balance in different areas.
Thank you, Corinna. So Markus, you started us off, and you heard your colleagues from different geographical regions talk about the traffic light coalition. And I think there's one question in the Q&A, I forget who it's from, but basically the phrase that stood out to me is, will the foreign policy elite in Germany simply check out? Do you think that, considering what's going on in Ukraine and the sort of the systemic rivalry with China that the United States describes, is Germany ready to confront the hard policy, foreign policy questions that are on the table?
Yeah, excellent question. I saw that in the chat, and I have to say, this is what it all comes about. And probably what we're seeing now happening in Ukraine and with Russia, it's a little bit like a wake-up call. I mean, I know this term wake-up call is a little overused, but still, I mean, it's probably for this new government a reminder that things are not as rosy as they want it to be, and it's not all about climate change or things as much as this is important, but there are other realities on the ground as well. So this is the one thing that probably could lead to a more realistic view and to more action, to be honest. And secondly, I mean, if it comes to pragmatism, if I remember, for instance, Angela Merkel, when she came into office, she met the Dalai Lama and openly, publicly, and she never did that again. Actually, later on, she was more, well, call it pragmatic, or I don't know, opportunistic. So yeah, a new government comes with a big push on certain issues, values-based foreign policy. We have to see what's left. If things escalate in Ukraine, I also believe that Germany will have a very clear response to that. And I mean, Michal, he already mentioned the trial we saw about this killing in Berlin, and the expulsion of two diplomats from the Russian embassy here in Berlin. So I guess this is a little bit of a foretaste of what we're probably going to see.
So thank you all for joining us today to talk about the Traffic Light Coalition. I'm so pleased that all of my colleagues could join us for this. As I mentioned before, it's an all-star GMF cast. I'd like to thank Markus, John, Corinna, and Michal for your time today, and wish all of you happy holidays, and we'll see you in the new year. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.